All right, so we've got Catherine of Siena, the wonderful, beautiful saint of a profound substitutionary love. That is, she gets us to feel what it might mean to love so limitlessly as to embrace the suffering of the world and bring about the healing of the world. The Seraphic Virgin of Siena was, it's not often said precisely, and I didn't quite do it in my video either. She was the part of a set of twins, one of the two twins, 23rd and 24th child of her mother. Her twin died, though, soon after they were born. And then the next child, the 25th child, died also. So she was ended up being the youngest of the Benincasa family. The house still stands in Siena. They were a family. Jacopo, her father, was a cloth dyer, so they belonged to this artisan class. Again, part of the up and coming bourgeoisie, right, of the medieval city. She was born in 1347, so that was the year the plague reached Europe, even though it was late in the year when it got to Sicily, and so it didn't really work through Italy until the next year. But that's always in the background here. Also in the background, of course, is the great drama, the other dramas, the Hundred Years' War and the Avignon Papacy. And I should do a little bit more of the background there just because it's so important for how St. Catherine's mystical life bore fruit in the rough and tumble of politics. The last of the Crusader kingdoms, Acre, fell in 1291. So that led to a concern on the part of the papacy to rally the leaders of Europe for a new attempt to recapture Jerusalem. But to do that, there had to be some kind of peace amongst the kingdoms. And of course, England and France were at each other's throats, had been for a long time, and would be entering into what we call the 100 Years' War within a few decades. So after the great villain, right, of Dante's life, Boniface VIII, the Pope who engineered his exile, or engineered the events that led to his exile, he was engaged in that great struggle with King Philip IV of France. He himself had taken over from one of the few popes who've resigned, and that's kind of important, right? Celestine V had wasn't a very good administrator. He resigned his office. There's only been 2 resignations since. One was kind of a forced resignation that helped end the papal schism over a century later. That's Gregory XII, and then of course we have Benedict XVI in the last in our current. Well, it's happening now. So Celestine he resigned. Boniface VIII comes in. He's a very dominating kind of personality. He may have had Celestine killed. But he was, he definitely was a man willing to give King Philip as good as he got. So Boniface engages in this dispute in which he asserts the supremacy of papal authority over even the temporal authority of kings and emperors. And then he gets basically killed by Philip's men, right? His minister, Guillaume de Nogaret, kidnaps him, beats him up. He dies. King Philip has proven that he's willing to go to extreme lengths to assert the primacy of his temporal power over papal power, at least in the lands of France. And the successor, well, the eventual successor, there's a pope who dies in between, but then the Archbishop of Bordeaux is elevated to the papacy in 1305, and he becomes Clement V. And so he's there to try to mediate. He's actually a subject. So Bordeaux is actually in English hands, part of that Gascony region. That's part of the conflict between England and France that will finally erupt into the Hundred Years' War. So he's a vassal of the King of England. He's also a friend of the King of France. So that's part of the reason, presumably, he was elected, is to try to mediate this again, to unify Europe and to turn again, the aristocratic violence of those aristocratic tendencies, those energies of those martial energies towards outside of Europe, towards the Muslims. But so Boniface stays in the south of France, quote unquote, and in this more or less papal enclave of Avignon, eventually by 1309. Boniface continues his assault on the church. He suppresses, well, he trumps up these charges against the Knights Templar. So they're an order, it's a kind of an odd idea, or an order of monk knights. I'm not crazy about the idea myself, but King Philip wanted their money. They became kind of a major banking concern because they helped manage the flow of money that makes crusading possible. King Philip, in his own version of Order 66, he in 1307 arrests all the Knights Templar in France on the same day, and is able to extract from them confessions of blasphemy and sodomy and all the things that he had trumped up. He gets the Pope, Clement V, to suppress the order. So it's lots of just heavy duty, nasty stuff that goes on in this conflict between Pope and King. So he goes on to Clement has to stay in the south of France, he thinks, to mediate. He doesn't want to go back to Rome where the families are all warring anyway. He's a Frenchman, certainly not Italian. And so the popes just continue, the ones who are elected after him by a predominantly French College of Cardinals. They continue to be from the southern French world. And St. Bridget of Sweden tries to get the popes over. She has some success, but it doesn't take, partly because the war in England, between England and France, had been in a lull in 1360s. Urban V followed St. Bridget's advice, moved back to Rome. The war started up again, though, so he wanted to go back to Avignon. St. Bridget dies, and then there's St. Catherine, who's there to take up the mantle of trying to put back together this major fracture in the psyche of Europe, to try to put the Bishop of Rome back in Rome. Now, she was outfitted to do this work because of her immense spiritual training, one might say. She was as ascetic as any that we've looked at from the Desert Fathers and Mothers on. She hardly ate anything for most of her life. I mean, for many years, it was basically the Eucharist that she was living off of. So that's miraculous. Just water and vegetables, uncooked vegetables. She flagellated herself, and this was a very common thing there at that time. This is foreign to our sensibilities, but definitely not uncommon there, and is part of the response to the Black Death. The flagellants were they were a common kind of lay movement that they would go from town to town. They would very conspicuously whip themselves. And that was part of the response. And again, part of the shift of trying to get spiritual power from clergymen to lay people. That was condemned. But the discipline, which was actually the name of a kind of whip you use, which is still used by some, to mortify the flesh, St. Catherine engaged in that self-mortification. And she had visions from the age of 5 or 6, levitation. I mean, all the big wonders were part of her life. She wanted to join the third order, the Sisters of Penitence, Le Mantelate, the Dominican lay women, and she did eventually, having a mystical betrothal to Christ at the age of 21. From then on, she was, with all this mystical, energizing, where she's living her life in another world, where she's seeing Christ in glory, where she's hearing words about what it means to love, and she's disciplining her body, where she doesn't sleep much at all, like half an hour or something. And she each night it's superhuman. Some would say inhuman, but she's trained into this instrument of God's merciful love. And so she goes on after this mystical betrothal. She's called by Christ in her visions to take on an active role in the world. First, she has to break her habit of always being alone in her own little room that she was given by the family, to start partaking in the rhythms of the household again, and then eventually helping out with people who are suffering in the hospitals. Presumably these include plague victims. She takes on immense burdens in caring for people that nobody else wants to care for, because they've got open wounds and they smell and all of that, but she's doing it because she loves God and she loves her fellow human. So this training in love, in the most rigorous exercise of love, that's what St. Catherine is all about. And so in the late 1360s, 1368 or so, Siena, her beloved city, which was always historically Ghibelline, but of course that didn't mean much after the Battle of Benevento, but they were historical rivals of Florence, which was generally Guelph, right? The city breaks down under its own internal factions. It's civil war basically for many years, and she's called into the world to become a peacemaker. So she's trying to deal with war in her own city. She's dealing with war amongst the city-states of northern and central Italy. She's dealing with war between the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope. And she knows that the disorder has a lot to do with the fact that the Bishop of Rome isn't in Rome. So she really pushes Gregory the 11th to get back to where he belongs, and that happens. He dies the next year after, so he goes back to Rome in 1377. He dies in 1378, and unfortunately, a new crisis erupts where Pope Urban VI, under pressure of the mob, is elected Pope. A Roman mob wants a Roman, or at least an Italian Pope, because they don't want the Pope to leave Rome again. And then the French cardinals repent of their decision to elect Urban Pope, and they hold their own conclave, and they elect a different man to claim to be the Pope. Urban VI calls on Catherine to support his claim, and she does. And so she's considered important by the very important powers in this world. Her city was about 60,000, again, one of the larger cities of the time, before the Black Death, and then by the end of the century would have been down to around 20,000. She's dealing with an era of great disorder, but she's trying to put with this burning love in her heart, some kind of order into the world. And there is this emphasis, especially you can see it in the collection we have, this infinite activism of charity, just more, 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 because God is infinite love, and that's what she wants to embody.